father did so much for so many. We needed a way to pay tribute to him and his extraordinary life.
When the time comes, talk to us. With every funeral service to meet your family's needs, our personal advisors will help make the moment a tribute to their legacy of life. Watson North, Funeral Home, Cremation Center, and Memorial Park.
It is 8:08, 8 minutes right now past the hour, and Common Sense Matters is on the air. Hi, Betty.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. You know, I guess this is my first time to be with you since I had a little bump in the road.
I understand.
But that bump's over. I'm through with therapy, and I'm back at it again, Al.
All right, and you got a lot to talk about.
Yes, I do. Not as easy today.
I understand.
As it is to come here and talk politics. I like to talk politics, but George deserves this, so I'm going to do this.
All right. Tell us about it.
Well, I guess first of all we need to let this is Gina. Let Gina tell you the date of the barbecue and why we're doing it, and then I'll start on my spiel.
All right.
Well, good morning, everyone. The George Fraley Annual Barbecue Supper will be held on Saturday, September the 28th, from 5 to 9 p.m. at the Heritage Room at the Franklin County Annex at 839 Dinah Shore Boulevard in Winchester. And the reason that we are holding this annual barbecue is because Mr. Fraley was a representative of the people. It didn't matter which side of the aisle you sat on or what your political views were. I don't remember of time that my father or any of the leaders there in Deckard called him that he didn't pick up the phone or that he didn't make himself readily available to them if there were issues in the community. And he did a lot, and his legacy is ongoing. And it's the right thing to do. It is the good thing to do, and because we all loved and appreciated Mr. Fraley.
So it's at the Annex?
Yes, ma'am.
It's at 5 o'clock or 5:30?
It's 5 o'clock is when the doors open. 5:30 is when we start serving.
And we have tickets available, and you certainly may call me for a ticket. I'm at 703-1143 or 967-3564. I'll be glad to deliver you a ticket or get it delivered. And, you know, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for allowing George to serve 30 years. He was on the county commission for 13 years. He served in the courthouse as county mayor or county executive, they called it then, for 4 years. And then he was able to serve in the state legislature for 14 years. He worked at Arnold Center for 32 years as a metallurgist. George was a dedicated employee at whatever he did. He was a workaholic. His recreation was farming. When he would get home from Nashville on Thursday afternoon, the first thing he would do would go to the farm. His fun was working, but he loved Franklin County, and he gave his all to serving the people of Franklin County because it was his first love. I want to tell you something about, this is about George, but I have to tell you how I got into the picture. George went to college 2 years, and then he volunteered into the Air Force. When he came back to MTSU to finish his education, I was there, and I was a junior, I think. And in those days, we were allowed to hitchhike to town. My college roommate and I and another friend were hitchhiking to town. We walked across the street from the dorm, and the townspeople would pick us up and let us ride to town. Nobody had a car in those days, if you can imagine such a thing. So I met George hitchhiking. I was hitchhiking, he picked me up along with two of my other friends. and took us to town. We found out that he was from Winchester. Okay, so when we would come home on Friday afternoons, that was a ride home for us. So we paid him $1 each way. 4 of us came with him. He went directly by 2 of the girls' houses. One lived in Prairie Plains, one lived in Gum Creek, and that's the way he came to Winchester. So we paid him $4 each way, $1 apiece. Well, $8 was enough to buy his gas for a week in those days, if you can imagine that. Then we started dating between my junior and senior year, and the first date we had, we came to the Franklin County Fair. I well remember coming to the Franklin County Fair. He got a job out of college, teaching school in Tullahoma, and I got a job in Whitwell. He only taught 1 year, and then he left that job. And at that time, Arnold Center would not hire you if you were a teacher in Tullahoma. You had to do something else before they would hire you. So he got a job adjusting insurance. He worked out of Cookeville, and he worked there for 2 years, for 1 year, and then was transferred to Tullahoma as an insurance adjuster. And we were married in 1957 after I'd taught in Whitwell for 2 years. I always have told this tale that George wouldn't marry me until I got my teeth fixed and paid my college debt and got a permanent, because he didn't want me to be an expense or a liability to him. So after we were married, we lived in Tullahoma for 4 years, and I taught there. Okay, in the meantime, he was hired at Arnold Center as a metallurgist, and of course had to take a lot of training. That was a new field. In lay terms, he x-rayed rockets before the rockets launched. The week before launch, George hardly came home. He would come home and eat and take a shower and go back to work. And we were always invited to go to a launch, but he would never take off from work to go. In retrospect, I wish I had gone by myself, because that would have been such a wonderful experience. I may still get to go before I die. I'm going to try to. Of course, he did not like Tullahoma. He had played football at Winchester, at Franklin County. So he came to Franklin County on Friday nights to the ball games. Well, wouldn't you know that he saw a 42-acre farm on Cumberland Street in Deckard for sale one night when he came to the farm, or to the ball game. So what does he do? He's working evenings at Arnold Center, and I'm working days at school. So he comes over here and buys a 42-acre farm with an old house on it. Understand, I have a brand new house in Tullahoma. He buys a house and 42 acres and moves me to Winchester. I cried all the way over here, because one of the reasons I went to college is so I wouldn't marry a farmer, because I was raised on a farm. I raised my own cotton crop when I was in the 8th grade. I milked cows. I just didn't want to go back to the farm. But let me tell you, I have really enjoyed Franklin County after I got over the shock. The fact that he bought the farm and didn't say anything to me about it and moved me here without saying anything was a shock. But after I got over the shock, I have loved Franklin County, and I have loved living here. And again, thank you for allowing him to serve all those years, because that was really his calling. Understand, he worked at Arnold Center, he ran a farm, and he served the people of Franklin County and served them well. Our district was 100 miles long. Sometimes he served Marion County, and sometimes he served Lincoln County. Now, I started my teaching career in Marion County. When he ran in Marion County, he got 70% of the vote, because I knew the people. Now, they were my age. See, I was 20 when I finished college. I graduated on Friday night, started teaching in high school on Monday morning. So the students were my age. But it worked out really, really well. And then, of course, when he ran over there, it certainly worked out well. So that takes care of our meeting, and then I was just going to tell you a few happenings that a few things that were said at his memorial service that I wanted to share with you. Floyd Backwell could say this so much better than I. But Floyd, at George's service, gave an example, or told the story of the first call he made to George after he was elected. And he said, I called and I got Betty, and she said, well, he'll call you back. He's not here yet from Nashville, but as soon as he gets here, he'll call you back. And Floyd said, and I'm a nobody, and I knew that he wouldn't, and I said, yeah, sure, to myself. Yeah, sure, he'll be calling me back. But knowing that he wouldn't, he said about 9:30 the phone rang, and he said, Floyd, this is George Fraley. How can I help you? He said that's what he always said. How may I help you? And I don't even remember what Floyd wanted, but whatever it was, George was able to help him with. And he said, I can't tell you how many people I referred to him so that they would call him and get the same results. But they would always say, well, I'm a nobody. He won't fool with me. Floyd said, you try. And he was certainly praising George for the fact that George always returned his calls. The only call that we didn't take, the man became very angry. We had a family funeral to go to, and the phone was ringing, and I shouldn't have answered it, but I did. And I said, would you please call back? I really don't have time to take your number even. So I would like for you to call back. And when he did finally call back, but he had misunderstood and thought that we were going to call him. And he was very angry, and that's the only time I remember that we didn't take the call. And Bobby Clark spoke at George's funeral. Bobby Clark is chairman of the road commissions, and so he had this tale to tell, that our state park was the only state park that didn't have a state road in front of it. It was a county road, and so Bobby saw that we were going to have to keep up that county road and what an expense it could be. And he and the senator had been working on it for ages, trying to get it a state road. And he thought, well, I'm just going to call George Fraley and tell him the circumstances and tell him that the senator's already working on it, but see if he can do anything about it. So he called George, and George, of course, immediately started working on getting it a state road so the state would have to maintain it. So weeks later, Bobby called George and said, well, I have just gotten a letter from the senator, and the senator said that there's no way that it's going to happen. It is not going to happen. I have done everything. This is the senator now. I've done everything I know to do to get this road, a state road, and it's just not going to happen. They're not going to do it. So Bobby thought, well, I'm going to call George Fraley anyway, and I'm going to tell him thank you for all the work he's put in. So he called George and said, George, I just got a letter from the senator telling me that y'all have failed and that it's not going to happen. It's not going to be a state road. And George said, well, Bobby, I don't know where he got his word. It's a done deal. I just now got the notification that it's a done deal. We'll be dedicating the road in a few days. So Bobby said that the senator said, I don't know how he did it. I'm just glad he did it, but I have no idea how he's able to do that. The other thing that George was very successful at when he was your representative was obtaining grants. His friend spoke at his service and said, you people don't have any idea how blessed you are to have this man as your state representative. He has done more for his district than any other legislator in Nashville. And he said, I actually followed him around and tried to learn how he got so many grants. And said, the only thing I observed was that George would go in the grant office, and the way you get a grant is having your grant close to the top. Well, his might be on the bottom, And George would go in there and he would sit down very calmly, never raised his voice, never beat on the desk, just had a conversation with the person. But I promise you, before he left, his grant would be in the top 10, and he would always get that grant. So you all have really profited from that, but I never did learn to do it myself. But George was very, very able to do that. Of course, Mansford Bridge was named in his honor, and I will be reading that when I read the editorial. Our schedule when he was a state legislator was just really, really unbelievable. Like I said, the district was 100 miles long. We had somewhere to be every night and every day. And understand, I was teaching school. If something was going on in Nashville that I needed to attend, I would go to school and teach school all day, drive to Nashville. If it was a real late thing, I would spend the night in Nashville. If not, I would come back. But if I spent the night, I'd get up early the next morning, and I would drive back to school, straight to school. I wouldn't go back home. So it was it was a it was a full schedule, and the phone rang all the time, and people thought that your house was your office. We had people come to our house, to our door, who we'd never seen before, at 10:30 on Sunday night with the problem. George never ever turned them down, and you know that job doesn't pay very much. I always said it was part-time pay and a full-time job, and really a full-time job for both of us, because both of us worked at it. After I learned to do some things, if he was not there, well, I would make the call and take that off him. Governor Bredesen referred to George as a workhorse, not a show horse. And Governor Bredesen said, when you see George Fraley coming, you may as well get yes on your lips for whatever he wants, because he's going to stay with you, and he's going to be so persistent, he's not going to leave you alone until you say yes. The only two things that George did not get, that he was real disappointed that he didn't, and that he wanted to get while he was in the legislature, he did not get the new vocational school that is going up now. Of course, he worked on it, but he was not reelected, so he did not get to finish that, and he did not get water at Key Springs Mountain. Those were the two things that he really wanted to get. I wanted to also talk to you about refurbishing the square in Winchester. I have explained that before on here, but so many people did not understand where that money came from. That money belongs to the city of Winchester, but it is sales tax money that normally the city of Winchester would send to the state of Tennessee. When Governor Bredesen came down here for one of his many visits, he came very, very often when George was state representative. We were meeting at the old Prince Drugstore building, and Beth Roten came to me and said, Mr. Fraley, do you think that you could introduce me to the governor and I could get an audience with him? And I said, well, Beth, I think so. So I introduced them, and she said, Governor Bredesen, would you step out on the sidewalk with me? And he did, and she said, now, I want you to look at this sidewalk. And, of course, if you remember how it looked, the sidewalks were all cracked, and
Yes.
it really, the square really was looking bad. She said, we need a facelift. She said, is there any way? And he said, I'll tell you what, Miss Roten, said, you get a grant together, and you give that grant to George Fraley, and we'll see what we can do. Well, Yvonne Stewart wrote the grant, gave it to George, and there again, as persistent as he is, Governor Bredesen said yes, and Winchester is one of 6 cities in the whole state of Tennessee who got that grant, and you have a beautiful square because of that. And I just wanted you to know, there was some criticism he got some criticism of it because there was a theory that money came from the other cities in Winchester or the whole county, that the whole county suffered because of the refurbishing Winchester. It did not. The money came from tax money that we would normally send to the state of Tennessee. And it was extended right then till 2022. And I just learned the other day that it has now been extended to 2026. So we get to keep our tax money in Winchester and not send it to the state for that many more years.
Wow, that is outstanding.
It is. Because of George and because of Beth and because of Yvonne Stewart, thank them, because the square, I think, is just beautiful, and people who come to the square are just very complimentary. I've had so many compliments on it. And you know, right after George passed away, and even still today, sometimes when I'm in a public place, someone will tell me something that he did for them personally. He did serve all the people. A Republican friend of ours had a Democratic young man call George one time for a favor. And George said, well, he doesn't have to have you call me. He said, I'll call him and talk to him and explain to him that I represent all the people. And it was an insurance problem of some sort. And George hung up the phone and called him and said, look, you don't have to ask this other man to call me. He said, I represent everybody, and I want you to know that, and I want everybody to know that. And, the atmosphere in Nashville was totally different when George was there. I have sat on the floor with him, and early in the morning, before they started voting, and Democrats and Republicans both would gather around George's desk and say, how do we need to vote on House Bill number so-and-so? Those people were there for the people. It didn't matter who presented the bill. If it was good for the people, everybody voted for it. And one time I was there and I was on the elevator with this young Republican guy. And he said, when I grow up, I'm going to be just like your husband. And I said, what's he done now? And he said, well, he fell. He was at the Hyatt Regency at an early morning breakfast, and there was ice on the sidewalk, and he fell and busted his head. And he had to go to the hospital and have his head sewn up. And I sat there, said he wouldn't stay in the hospital. He came straight back to the legislature, drafted 3 bills with blood dripping off the back of his head.
Oh my goodness. Onto
his suit, and said, when I grow up, I'm going to be just like your husband. And I said, well, I hope you won't do that. Mike Turner also spoke at his funeral, and Mike Turner was George's suite mate when George first went to Nashville. And Mike Turner said that he was a caucus chair, and he was trying to just beat into people what he wanted them to do and to vote like they wanted him to vote, like he wanted them to vote. And said George came through one day and very humbly said, Mike, would you mind if I gave you some advice? And Mike said, no, George, I need all the help I can get. And George said, well, Mike, let me tell you, what you need to do is win one person over on each issue. Now, if you keep on doing like you're doing, they're going to gang up against you and they're going to whip you. But if you'll just gain one person over on your side on each one of these issues, then pretty soon you'll have them all voting like you want them to vote. And he said, you know what? Said he was right. I tried that and it worked. So said George gave me some advice when he first got there that I hadn't used before. There were some fun things also that happened in the legislature. Now remember, When George was in the legislature, I didn't have a GPS, and we had to go a whole lot of places that we'd never been before. But it was an education for me. I enjoy politics. Everybody said that I knew how to get George elected, and he knew how to govern, and we were sort of a team. George really knew government. I had a government class with him in college. There would be a question, and he would answer a whole page. I would answer the question. I'm a numbers person. I would answer the question in 5 lines, a short paragraph, but he would answer in a whole page, and he really did know a lot about government. The other thing that I was going to talk about was going to the let me see if I've covered everything going to the governor's mansion. And the first week that George was a legislator was in 1996. I was in school. Beth went with him. My daughter went with him the first week. And because they have receptions and they have mixers and they have get-togethers, and all they do is get acquainted with the whole legislature. On Friday night, they went to the governor's mansion, so of course I joined them at the governor's mansion. So I was just then being introduced. So I introduced myself to Stratton Bone. And by the way, Ned McWhirter was governor then, and every time that Ned spoke at the governor's mansion, every time I heard him speak, he would always say, "This is the best public housing I've ever lived in." When I introduced myself to Stratton Bone, I said, "I'm Betty Fraley. I'm Representative Fraley's wife." And he said, "Oh, yes," said, "I met him earlier this week." Said, said his daughter was with him. And I said, "We don't have a daughter." Stratton Bone turned pale. He didn't know what to say. All the blood drained out of his face. His lips were moving, but they weren't saying anything. And of course, I got tickled because of his expression, and I laughed. And he said, "I can't believe you did that to me." He said, "I don't even know you." I said, "But you do now, don't you?" And it worked so well, I didn't even know I was going to do that. It worked so well, I also did it on John Tidwell, and John Tidwell later said, the thing that was going through my mind was, I've been in the legislature 1 week, and I have caused this old couple to get a divorce. I have already told on this old man, and they'll be getting a divorce, and it'll be my fault. But every time I see either one of these men, they say, "Do you have a daughter?" And I saw Stratton at a gathering in Nashville not long ago, and I walked up to him, and he said, "You don't have to introduce yourself to me." He said, "I won't ever forget you." So it was, we did have some fun times. We went to Boston to a national legislators convention. Could have gone to several more, but, George would never take off work to do things like that.
Dedication.
He was a dedicated employee, and I can't say enough things. Now, George was a quiet person, it seemed to you and to the public. He was not quiet at home. George was in charge. I never won an argument with George Fraley. Everybody thinks I'm a loudmouth, and he's real quiet. But I never won an argument with him in all my life. So he was an aggressive person when he needed to be aggressive, and that's where the people of Franklin County profited.
That's true.
As a tribute to him, there was the nicest editorial in the paper after his death, and I'm going to share that with you because it says more about him from somebody else, and it is a summary of everything that he did here, except the only thing is the new bypass, and I wanted to talk about that. George was defeated on November the 2nd. On November the 3rd, now this is 2010, on November the 3rd there was a meeting about the bypass, where the roundabout is, at the National Guard Armory. George is off the payroll. He's no longer a state representative, but he goes to that meeting to solidify the plans for that bypass. On Monday, after George's funeral on Saturday, the city of Winchester called me and said, with your permission, we would like to name the bypass George Fraley Memorial Parkway. And of course, I just burst into tears because that was such an honor, and it was something that he would have really liked. And I know something I didn't mention in this other thing, but it's also in the editorial. But the fact that he was chosen as outstanding alumni at MTSU for service to his community was always such an honor to me. The one big disappointment, he was never Citizen of the Year. He was nominated several times, but he was never selected Citizen of the Year in Franklin County. I think it was a bigger disappointment to me than it was maybe to George, but it was a disappointment. Okay, now here is the editorial that I wanted to share with you. To say the least, Mr. Fraley may be gone in an earthly sense, but the track record of what he did in Franklin County's best interest will never be forgotten. George Fraley served as county commissioner in Franklin County from 69 to 82. He then served as county executive from 1990 to 94, and he also served as a Tennessee state representative for 14 years. And I think really the state representative was his calling. I think that he was able to do more there than anywhere. And that's what I enjoyed about that job, was being able to help people. Even after he was defeated, we got calls wanting help, and I would always refer them to the right people, but I'd say, look, I can't we don't have that privilege anymore. We don't have that connection anymore. But it was a real privilege to get to help people who needed help. The deputy governor introduced me one time and said, the one thing I like about Miss Fraley is she always asks for help for other people, but she has never asked for one thing for herself. And I said, you know what? It never occurred to me that I could.
Wow.
And it really had never occurred to me that I could get favors, but I enjoyed helping other people. Throughout his political life, he was instrumental in improving Highway 64 from a two-lane road to the divided thoroughfare that it is today, making travel to other parts of the state much more motorist-friendly. He also played a significant role in getting Winchester Square revitalized, improving the city's appearance and bolstering tourism opportunities. George Fraley was also a proponent for children's safety by being a strong force in getting turn lanes into the county's school campuses to keep parents and their precious cargo out of harm's way. He strived to obtain grant money that has been used in numerous instances to improve life at the local level. Now understand, if you don't bring the grant money here, it goes somewhere. So he always tried to make sure that it came here. I remember his getting grants for the local fire departments. I remember he got $10,000 for Broadview one time. He got $7,000 for Capitol Hill one time for a roof on their building. I don't know why I remember those numbers, but I do. No matter what Mr. Fraley did, he left his mark in the way he helped improve life for Franklin County residents and those in other parts of the state. And to put it mildly, his efforts did not go unnoticed. Middle Tennessee State University honored Mr. Fraley as being the school's outstanding alumni for his service to his community. In March 2015, George Fraley was recognized for his service when the Mansford Bridge was renamed in his honor. And the Chamber of Commerce gave him a wonderful reception after that ceremony. It was in February. It was very cold, but there was a large number there. The tributes he received are only fitting for a man who accomplished so much so unselfishly. The impact he had on lives was blatant by the large group who attended his visitation and funeral service. during the weekend before he was laid to rest at Franklin Memorial Gardens in Winchester. With his passing, George Fraley was duly recognized in tributes given by those who knew him best. The marquee on the theater in Winchester said, "Thank you, George Fraley," and flags flew at half-staff. I couldn't have been more pleased with the turnout and with the gratitude that the community showed at his death. He fell and hit his head, and he was gone in 3 days, which was certainly a shock to me. With his passing, he was recognized by those who knew him best. County Mayor Richard Stewart, who was county mayor at that time, was also one of the honorary pallbearers at Mr. Fraley's funeral. He shared his long-standing ties to the Franklin County leader and his family. Personally, George has been a very close friend of mine all these years, Stewart said. He's been a hero, a mentor, and just an excellent example of public service, the great job he's done for over 30 years for Franklin County. He has always been a good family man. His family came first, like it should, and his church, too, his Christian faith. Christine Hopkins, a career educator and Franklin County School Board member, said Mr. Fraley had many valuable roles he undertook during his lifetime. George's first job out of high school was mixing mud to build Broadview School. Broadview School, the main part of Broadview School was built in 1949. Christine said that she was a close friend of Mr. Fraley and his wife Betty. She said he did a lot for this county. Ms. Hopkins said the significant turnout at Mr. Fraley's visitation was a testimonial on the impact of his many accomplishments and the relationships he forged, both personally and professionally and personally in Franklin County and beyond. They definitely respected him, she said, referring to Mr. Fraley's political colleagues. And the folks in this county definitely respected him. He did a lot for this county, and as a county executive and as a state representative for many years. In 2015, Helen Stapleton, a county commissioner, wrote a letter to the editor in tribute to Mr. Fraley, summing up what he was so deserving that he was so deserving to have the Mansford Bridge named in his honor. Now, this was while George was still alive, but this also is in this editorial. Everyone who has a job at Nissan owes him a debt of gratitude for his role in locating the plant here. See, George was in the courthouse when Nissan located here. I've never seen him as excited. I got home from school that afternoon, and he met me at the door, all smiles, and said, "Nissan's coming, but we can't tell a soul," because they were very secretive about locating here. And of course, I had to go to school the next day. The governor came, announced that Nissan was coming, and I didn't even get to go because I couldn't leave my class.
Wow.
But I did get to go when they dedicated Nissan, but I didn't get to go that day, which would have been a very, very good time to go. Every time we turn, and this is Helen Stapleton again, every time we turn safely into a school and the hospital and major subdivisions on state roads, we can thank him for putting in the turning lanes. Stapleton went on to mention other contributions Mr. Fraley has made to the county. Every time we go to our newly renovated square in Winchester, we can thank Mr. Fraley for securing the funding which will help local businesses. She said, think of him every time you see the water tank and fire halls in Cowan, the airport, or fire hydrant in rural areas. Stapleton also credited Mr. Fraley with establishing the county's solid waste authority, including the convenience centers. Everywhere you look in Franklin County, there are monuments to his hard work, even in such everyday acts as driving down the highway that he secured funding for, or upgraded to state routes, or turning on water, or using the Winchester City Park facilities. Thank you, Mr. Fraley. Franklin County is a better place than it was before you came into office. The statements made about George Fraley speak for themselves. We all owe a great deal of gratitude to him for what he did to make life better in one way or another for all of us. So that's the reason that there is a barbecue. All of those things are the reason that there's a barbecue in his honor. Please show up for the barbecue, and please support him and support the Democratic Party. And they had selected George's name to be used because he did do a lot. And I'm not modest in saying that. He did do a lot for this area. And he wanted to do a lot for this area. We both have grown to love, or I grew to love Franklin County. He loved it from the beginning. But of course, this is a call-in show. This is Common Sense Matters. I would be glad to have anyone call in and make a comment if you would like to. We have several more minutes. Al, do you have any questions or any comments?
No, it's just a big event. I know that everybody needs to turn out and one to honor George, and also a big day to come out and help with the Democratic Party as well. But the main thing is not around the party; it's around remembering George.
That's right. That's right.
And George was a good friend of a lot of people. I grew up with George. I was a young kid. And remember George all those years and all the many things that he did. I think you got a phone call this morning. Somebody wants to chat with you guys.
Hello.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hey, Miss Betty.
Yes.
This is Angie Fuller. How are you this morning?
Well, Angie, I'm really blessed. I'm doing really well.
Good. We all are. I want to say something about Mr. George Fraley. I was a student at West Junior High the first year Mr. George Fraley taught school, and he just took me under his wing and always kept me there. And I lost track with him there for several years until I started to run for county commissioner. And I was talking about my community, and I went and asked Mr. Fraley and talked to him for a while before I ran. And he's always been one of my best friends, and you have too, Miss Betty. And I could always call him and ask him anything, and I could believe everything that he told me, and I would try to do whatever he told me to do because it was always the right thing. And I will be at this summer, Lord's willing. And I would like for all my friends to be there because Mr. Fraley was such a good man. And you are too, and I appreciate everything you said on the radio about Mr. Fraley this morning.
Thank you, Angie. That I really do appreciate that. That was not an easy program for me.
I know it. I know it wasn't, and I was praying for you all morning, and I've been listening. And my prayers will still always be with George Fraley's family, and they'll always be my friends. And I appreciate everything, and I want to ask everybody to come to this supper because it's very important. And I will talk to you later. I'm on the way to Chattanooga.
I had never realized that you were a student in the school where he taught. He only taught 1 year.
Yes.
I think he really enjoyed teaching, but the salary was just not the kind of salary he wanted to make. And like I said, they wouldn't hire him straight.
School, but I liked it that year. And he knew that I milked cows.
Yeah.
And he would talk to me about the farm and about milking cows, and I really, really got to know Mr. Fraley then, and he was an excellent teacher that year to me. And like I said, we've been friends all this many years, and I really respected him, and I miss him so much. So God bless all of y'all, and have a good day.
Thank you so much, Angie. If anyone else would like to call in and make a comment, we would really appreciate it.
Well, in the interim, I have a personal story. I can remember Mr. Fraley when I was a young child. There were some issues about Hillcrest School over in Deckard. And my father had called Mr. Fraley, and lo and behold, he showed up. And my father called Mr. Ethel Esther. He called Miss Lois Ackland, Ed and Delphina Jones, and some of the other community leaders, and they sat there in my parents' living room and talked about that and worked that issue out. And you don't get that anymore. You don't get hands-on. You don't get people who are willing to come to you, if necessary, to work on an issue in the community. And that left an impression with me. So when I came back and I started engaging in the activities with the Democratic Party and saw you, those things came back to me, because that wasn't the first or the last time that my father had interactions with Mr. George, and it always left a lasting impression on me that that's what a community leader is.
You know, another thing George did, he took blue books to every school in the county.
Wow.
He did. He would bring boxes of blue books, and he wanted to see that every school had blue books.
That's amazing.
And a blue book, if you don't have a blue book, it's unbelievable how much information is in there. And you know, another thing that I want to emphasize that you need to vote. Election day is coming up. I have some dates concerning election day. November the 3rd is the big day. The offices, let me see, that are up for grabs, of course, is the president. So we've got to vote. When we turn out, we win, but when you don't turn out, you lose. You just must go vote. So plan on that this November, and the deadline for registration, and I don't have that readily in front of me, but anyway, it'll be out pretty soon. But you need to vote.
And I'd like to let everybody know that the events is going to go to the benefit of the George Fraley Academic Scholarship. So this isn't about Democrat or Republican. This is about carrying on his legacy with our children as they go forth into the world and hopefully make their mark in a similar fashion.
I gave the scholarship. I don't select the person for the scholarship. I let it would be somebody who's going to major in accounting, and I let the school, the teachers, select that person. And this time it was a Vaughn girl, and I taught the grandmother and granddaddy. I didn't, and maybe the daddy, at the high school. So this year it was a Vaughn girl. The Fernander boy got it one year. And I don't remember the one in between, but ever since George has passed away, Al Gore sent me $250 for his scholarship when he passed. And by the way, Al Gore is going to be talking at the Tucker Building in Murfreesboro at MTSU on Monday.
Excellent.
At 3 o'clock. He has written a book, I think, concerning maybe concerning civil rights that his dad was responsible for. I'd like to go here, and I'd like to see Al again. I haven't seen him in a long time. Anything else that you'd like to say?
Well, on the evening of the event, we have two special guests. One is Representative Gloria Johnson from Knox County, and the other will be the Democratic Caucus Minority Leader, Karen Camper from Shelby County. And they're both very dynamic ladies. I got to meet both of them on different occasions, and I just saw Gloria this past weekend at our fall board, and she let me know, I've got my tickets in my computer bag. I will not forget them, but will you please let me in if I do? And I told her, of course, she would definitely be let into the function, because she is going to be our keynote speaker. And I hope you guys come out and hear both of these dynamic ladies, because they are really working. Because when I mentioned it to Gloria that we were, about it being the Fraley barbecue in his honor, she said, yes, I've heard a lot about him over the years, and we should all have his work ethic.
Yeah.
We should all strive to put that much energy into doing the things that we do here and representing the people in the same manner that he did. And I just thought, wow, that is a testament when people who don't know you still
Well, the
appreciate
first time
it.
I met Gloria was at Henry Horton State Park. They invited us back to a meeting after George had lost the election. They missed us and we missed them. And I walked in just to say hello. And the guy at the front desk, at the front table, had a gavel. And he hit the gavel and said, "All rise, the Honorable Betty Fraley has arrived."
Maybe
That's
I got a
funny.
text from a individual says I can't call in, but my favorite memory of Mr. George was a school project I had at South in Science that I had to have different leaves off of different trees. And of course, as a youngster, I waited until the last minute the night before, and my mom called him, and we went out and got leaves out of his yard. He helped us and told us each different type of a tree, such an aspiring family in our community.
I remember that. I can't remember the name of the student who did that.
Kelly Rab
Kelly Rabb. Yeah.
Bolin now.
Yeah, Kelly Rabb Bolin. Yes, I remember. And of course we always got our yard rolled really well at Halloween because I had 30 trees in my yard, and that was always such fun to clean up. We posted my son and Todd Boswell behind the well house with fire extinguishers one night and,
that's a pair.
and wet them down. And there were 13. Somebody brought 13 kids out there in a van
Oh my
and
goodness.
wet them down. And Barry ran and jumped in the van, and the woman took off and said, "Is that you, George? Is that you, Barry?" And so when they came and caught up with the van and got in, one little boy said there wasn't anything fair about that. Said they had all the lights off. Barry was in college and I was in the back ironing, so sure enough I turned out. Said they pretended like they were in the bed asleep. Wasn't anything fair about that. Said I am about to freeze. So we had fun with it too, but it was a mess. But I miss that, and I miss not knowing all the young people. I miss school. I really did like to teach school. That was my calling. I was offered the assistant principalship at the high school and South Middle, and I stayed in the classroom because that's where I needed to be.
Amen.
I didn't want to handle discipline all day.
Right.
I sure did not.
And we just wanted to share also that in addition to the barbecue supper on the 28th, we also have our party meeting on September the 17th, which will be next Tuesday at 5:30 in the small meeting room at the Franklin County Annex.
So I guess that about winds us up, doesn't it, Al?
Pretty close.
Thank you so much. This is Common Sense Matters. Thank you so much, and I would so appreciate your attendance at the barbecue. I've already sold, I believe I got 20 more tickets today to sell. I've already sold 20, and I plan to sell as many as I possibly can because this is a good cause, and this is the first time that we have used some of it for the scholarship. But I think it's only fitting that we use some of it for the
Exactly.
scholarship.
Oh,
So
no.
I think this is what, it's supposed to be a family event. You want kids and you want
Oh,
everybody
yes.
to come be a part of this. It's
Yes.
not just for adults.
That's right. And the entertainment, now my daughter will play the guitar and sing some of George's favorite songs, which we were allowed to do when he was in palliative care at Vanderbilt. There was a guitar in the rotunda, and she said, "Whose guitar?" And they said, "For anybody who wants to use it." And so for 30 minutes, I guess, the night before he passed away,
Oh,
they
that
said
is
if
wonderful.
anything is still alive, it will be his hearing. And so we had a real good night the night before he passed away.
Oh, that's amazing.
And the nurses said, "Open the door, we want to hear it too."
That is amazing.
Vanderbilt was a wonderful place to be at that time. Now the business end of it, I had really lots of trouble collecting my insurance because of Vanderbilt after that, but it was a wonderful place to be.
Okay.
And we're going to have an amazing menu provided for us by Larry's Barbecue. Tammy Keys is going to square us all away, and we're going to have an outstanding meal that evening.
Sounds good. Ladies, thanks for coming out. And that's Common Sense Matters for today, right?
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You guys have a great weekend.
Thank you. You're listening to WCDT AM 1340, W295 FM 106.9 in Winchester, Tennessee.
It is now time for a look at your WCDT community calendar. On Friday, September 20th, from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., the Smokey and the Band-Aid Convoy will be at the Fall Heritage